Welcome to Charts Chat for Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Again, for anybody who's just joined, I'll paste the meeting minutes in the chat here. All right, we have a few discussion topics already lined up. I did the first two, and I see, I think, Scott, you're adding more. If anybody had any others who's here, please feel free to add them. The first one that I thought I would cover for anybody who's not involved, we've been working on the Helm long-term governance. I don't know how much folks want to go in. We went into a fair amount of detail in the last Helm community meeting. There is a document with the proposed governance. Actually, I think I could share it here. I have the version of it. And I'll share that into chat. This is the proposed governance structure. I just shared it into chat. If you want to take a quick minute, I'm happy to answer questions. There are a couple of tweaks we got to bring in here that just clarify some nuanced language that we recorded from the Helm call, such as what happens if somebody steps down and you've got an even number of the project maintainers, and what do you do in the interim? There's a couple of things like that. That code-based maintainers don't have to be developers. For example, they could be a documentation writer or something else, things like that. But these are the main areas, and here's where we kind of been going with this. Did folks want me to cover it real briefly, or?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. And for those of you who don't know, we have the reason we're going after this is we have a provincial governance in place for the Helm project that's documented here. And to make any decision requires voting right now. And we kind of have two processes, and we've got a deadline to have a long-term governance and a process for deciding on that. And so right now we're kind of in the coming up with stuff phase. If you look at the provincial governance of where we're coming up with documentation on it, what are we going to do? So kind of here's how it works, right? The Helm governance, this is the top level governance for the project that digs into, just kind of in general how we're going to operate. Here, I guess I could share my screen, maybe make it a little easier. Let's find it real quick. All right. So I'm sharing my screen with the governance. So it defines the Helm project and that it's made up of several code bases. There's Helm, the package manager, charts, Monocular, chart museum, and I've got chart testing here. It kind of just listed out the different repos, along with the services that we have, documentation to create, distribute, just to do all the things, and then the public chart search and discovery, something that is a second proposal that's kind of going on right now. Now, it gets into the maintainer structure and says there's two levels of them. There's the project maintainers, which are interested in the overall Helm project, and then there are code-based maintainers who are managing the individual code itself. Project maintainers deal with things like the mission, vision, values of the project, refining the overall structure. Anything that's a project level decision, branding things. They're responsible for controlling repositories, assets, calendars, stuff like that, right? Code of conduct violations, decisions of a new subgroup or code base is going to be, added on. Things of that nature, financial decisions, kind of those top level project management, project ownership things. And then there's criteria for how changes are made to those, right? We need between 3 and 9, an odd number. You got to be a code-based maintainer to even be eligible. We want you to be invested in it. So code-based maintainers, or somebody who's not really involved in the project gets to be here. We don't want that. We want real folks involved. We set limits on, no company or organization can employ a majority of the project maintainers. We really want to keep this diverse. Then there's things around what happens if somebody becomes inactive, where we say if it's, they've been inactive for greater than 3 months, they actually lose project maintainership. We want people who are involved. Now there's an opt-out, like if somebody goes on maternity or paternity for 6 months, then you could say, okay, a supermajority says, you know what, we understand they're stepping away for a short bit. We plan on them being back. We're okay with them stepping away for a little bit. We do offer that. New maintainers can be added with a supermajority, and any a project maintainer can nominate an existing code base maintainer to do this, and then once they accept is when the process would kick off, although we have to keep an odd number between 3 and 9. And when somebody steps down, they become emeritus. Those are the kind of the main things. And they remain in place until stepping down or being removed for being inactive. That's kind of the top level project maintainers. Now the code base maintainers are responsible for the development and release of the technical bits of it. The code, if they're operating something like a website, they're responsible for all of the technical decisions. The one gotcha on that is if 2 different areas can't come to agreement, right? Let's say Monocular and Chart Museum are dealing with an issue and they just cannot come to agreement on it, on the technical issue, then it can bubble up to the project maintainers to try to figure out how do we work through that. All right. It doesn't mean they'll make the decision. It just means that they're the ones who will be kind of we're going to figure out how to deal with this problem of not being able to work it out. But otherwise, the code base maintainers own the technical decisions and the work forward. There's some criteria on how they're elected. And, if you are inactive, then you're automatically removed. But again, project maintainers can say, no, from a supermajority, no, we'll extend it for a time. And there's things around announcements. Sorry, you had a question or comment? Oh, okay. So this is kind of the code base maintainers. They on a code base itself, like Chart Museum, they can self-add new maintainers, right? They don't need anybody else to do it. And so this is kind of the tiers of maintainership. We're kind of, the CNCF wants us to have one set of project maintainers for the whole thing. They're going to be responsible for a lot of high-level stuff, but we have a lot of code-based maintainers, and not all the code-based maintainers want to deal with the project-level stuff. We've already discovered this. You just don't want to. There isn't an interest in it, and quite frankly, right now there are a lot of them. There's like 25 of them, and I would not be surprised if that number even grew a little bit, right? Or it may shrink or grow, but that's a lot of folks to have involved who don't need to be involved to know those things. So that's kind of why we've got the 2 different distinctions, so folks can focus on different things. The one thing you'll notice is the project level maintainers. We do have an open question on how do we initially seed that and kind of keep fairness across all of the different code bases. That is currently an open question we are seeking feedback on. There's some different ideas that have been posted around. In fact, they're inside of this document with different comments, but that's one of the things that we're looking at. Then we get into decision-making, where the default decision-making process is lazy consensus. Quite frankly, this would be really nice right now as we're doing things on the project, because a lot of stuff could just be lazy consensus right now, but we have to take it through a vote. And so it would be nice. If lazy consensus cannot be found, we move to a majority vote decision. And most things can be done with a lazy consensus. There's a handful of things we say cannot be lazy consensus, and there's a list here of those. And they have what you have to use in its place. So code of conduct violation, a supermajority is what we have listed, although we would like to hash out, should it be a simple majority or a supermajority? I don't know. Electing new maintainers, removing a maintainer for any reason other than inactivity, changing the governance rules, anything that has to do with licensing and intellectual property, adding, archiving, or removing subprojects, and anything that does not deal with money that is not considered cheap and easy. The reason cheap and easy is here is this is the term that the CNCF gave us, because if it's cheap and easy, they're just going to do it. But if it's not, then they will come back to the project maintainers and say, hey, this request, it's not cheap and easy, let's talk about it. And their term was cheap and easy. And so they're the ones who will trigger something that's not cheap and easy. I see there's a question about what's the difference between a simple majority. Yeah, we can probably clear up some language around where we just say majority vote and what we mean by simple majority versus versus supermajority. That's a good idea there. And then, of course, we get into code of conduct. The project maintainers are responsible for code of conduct violations unless there's a code of conduct violation brought against one of the project maintainers, at which time the CNCF can be brought in. On the code of conduct, the CNCF code of conduct is who you contact for those things and how it would handled. If I understand it right, that means the TOC can step in and intervene in this. That's the CNCF responsible party that would do it. But that's for code of conduct violations. And then there's the licensing and that stuff. There's the Apache for code, the Creative Commons for documentation. These two are both the licenses that Kubernetes has used. And then developer certificate of origin for new contributions. We recently had a vote, one of the things we have to vote on, and we're going to move from the CLA to a DCO. And you'll find that, and all of this is going to be written up here shortly in a blog post as we go to make the move. There's some logistical dances we have to do to make the move, such as removing the CLA bot and adding DCO bots, things like that, and communicating how all of this works. But essentially, Kubernetes and gRPC are the only CNCF process projects to use a CLA. Everything else uses a developer certificate of origin. There's a lot of history behind it, but we are given the option of switching, and we found it to be a lot easier because new contributors or anybody who wants to contribute just has to give sign off on their commits and otherwise, be in a position to contribute. And the DCO says what that is, and then they can contribute. They don't have to get their company to go sign off with the CLA through the CNCF before they can contribute on behalf of their company. If their company is okay with it, they can do a sign off on it, accept the DCO, and they can contribute. It removes a lot of that legal handshake for contributors to be able to go through, especially some of the bigger companies. Sometimes you have trouble, your management's like, it's fine to contribute, but then you've got to get the legal office to go do this, and next thing you know, you're 3 weeks later going nuts. This is a legitimate problem. And so the DCO, which by the way was originally written by the Linux Foundation, which the CNCF is part of, is behind all this. And so we are switching to that. The vote's been done. We just got to get the dance in place. And so that's outlined here. And then we do have the outstanding issues here, which if I remember right, has to deal with either code of conduct or how do we get a good number of sub-project maintainers, code-based maintainers as project maintainers. That's kind of what we're looking at. So are there any questions on the Helm governance? If anybody wants to reach out to me offline or any of the other folks involved offline, please let me know. Happy to answer questions or add clarifications. There's some comments in here already to help do that before it gets to the pull request phase and we go through the vote process. That's what will happen. But this is what we're thinking for the top level.
Yeah, this is super well thought out. I'm guessing there are no questions not because no one's interested, but because it's pretty well covered.
So this was actually generated from looking at and reviewing what others had done on other projects, Kubernetes and other CNCF projects. We decided to look for their best practices. One of the things about all of this is that we were asked to keep it simple. Kubernetes has an incredibly complicated governance structure, more so than any other project, but it is also much larger than any other project with the thousands of people. I think it's the most actively contributed project on GitHub. Some of the interesting stories where we've broken parts of GitHub are kind of amusing when we get into it because we've done things at a scale no one has done before. And so now that we can do this at a smaller scale, we can adopt many of the things the other projects have done. And so we were encouraged to keep it simple and then make changes to this as we actually encounter the problems. Don't try to over-govern kind of thing. All right, so that's...
How are we going to do the move to DCO? I guess we have to support like both CLA and DCO for quite a while, or otherwise all the pull requests would have to be updated.
Yeah, we'll probably have an overlap period where if it came in under the CLA, it's fine, and then anything new needs to be under the DCO. We should have, if it was on a CLA, we should have the label on any pull request saying that it passed the CLA. Anything new can come under the DCO. The hard part will be the merge automation, and I'm not sure how we're going to make the owner's file merge automation work. To do an OR on that. That's one of those things that we've got to figure out before we actually pull the trigger on a move. How are we going to do the OR? Does it have a DCO or a CLA? Then it's good. I don't know. But yeah, that's actually part of the reason we haven't pulled the trigger yet on it, is those logistical problems are not exactly worked out. But it's on my to-do list. And if anybody wants to help me with that, I would love the help. It'll get done quicker then.
Matt, what do you think you would need help with specifically? What would be the best? What would be the most helpful?
We're still using the Kubernetes merge automation around owners files.
Yeah.
And that merge automation, so that merge automation runs through the test infrastructure. Let me go grab the config that I mean by that.
So would that mean we're going to move away from PROW, or?
No. The PROW will work with the DCO.
Okay.
What PROW does is, here we go. So, hold on. So what PROW does is if you go here, you're going to see how I think this is our merge automation. Yeah. So if you look at here, you're going to see for the repo Helm charts, in order for something to be merged, it needs to have these 3 labels on it, and it has to be missing the labels below. Okay. And so the system is going to look for these characteristics. Now, obviously, when we go to a DCO or we've got crossover, what does that mean for the CNCF CLA? Now, the DCO check is, hold on. The DCO check is over here. It's done through a system called Probot. Okay. So, now, it doesn't do, if I understand it right, it doesn't do any labels or anything like that. So we would probably need to add an extra thing in there that deals with labels. Now, what do we do? What does this trigger look like and how does it work? I'm not exactly sure. Where's it hosted at? Still not exactly sure on that either. Or if there's anything we can do with configuration of this.
I gotcha. I can help with that side of things too. I have not done it yet, but I could help spend some time helping look into it and setting up an example repo with that.
Yeah, like I'd love to do a label that says like signed off on committing or something, just some generic one that could cover both. Then we update the PROW configuration, which is a really, really, really easy thing to do, to update that config file. And once it's merged, it's automatically reloaded and works then. And then we have both systems record that. Either the CLA has been merged over to that or copied over to the new tags, so there's both. And then anytime the DCO passes, that is updated as well. And something like that. And I don't know whether we could even contribute it back to Probot, because it is entirely open source, or maybe there's something in it now. But these are the kinds of things that we're looking for, is how do we handle this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Getting into the next proposal, it may be that this is a short time lived thing though, because hopefully we can replace the charts repo here this year, which was actually the second thing I had in the agenda. Can we move to that?
Yes.
So
I put a link to a sketch there. That was from the brainstorm that I had with Adnan. That was based on the idea that he put forth initially.
You put it where? Where did you share the link?
I'm sorry, I put a link in the doc, in the
Okay.
text chat doc under that bullet point. It's a very simple one. I said that I would sketch up a quick proposal based on that, brainstorm for team feedback. I didn't really get to. I didn't really get to make it an incredibly fleshed out one, but it has these 6 steps and a couple of thoughts and questions at the end. It's mainly just for discussion, for feedback. But I can also help explain anything that might not be clear.
Oh, this is for taking a code base and making it a repo.
Right. So the idea is that distributed charts, yeah, exactly. To help, essentially to help ease the, because right now distributed charts already exist. Helm has that functionality. The reason, and discoverability exists with monocular repos. I think the idea, and maybe I should have put this at the top, is that the idea is to have a CNCF hub monocular instance where they would point to separate repos that are, ultimately hosted in different places. And the idea is that you can do it yourself in any way you want. If your company has a very, very complex or, more extensive setup, then great, fine. Don't use our tool to help automate that for you. If you do your own testing and it's way more than what, charts repo testing does now, great. But what the idea of this is that, oh, and by the way, that the idea is that the process of adding those charts to that monocular instance, the CNCF hub monocular instance, would still be, at least thus far, a manual process, a manually opening a PR to say, I want to add this, and then it gets reviewed, and then we say, cool. And then there's an additional process of, I think it's a question for me, is how do you then help migrate or decommission the old location in the centralized kind of monolithic charts repo and say, oh, well, this is now in the new place. I don't know that yet, but that's the only other question. And then the rest of this is a thought about how to ease that pain for people who, not necessarily weekend warriors, but like people maybe who don't have the setup that I just described, where your company already has a very extensive, automation and testing and all of that.
Yeah. Right now, where we're at in this process, by the way, for those, is there is a distributed search proposal that has been put onto the the community to essentially add this single search location that would sit at charts or hub.helm.sh, someplace like that the Helm project would host. And that would look at distributed repos. And those distributed repos, like you say, exist. Like one of them that I've been playing with lately is Weaveworks Flux, which hosts their repo right up on GitHub as a repo, and it's served through GitHub.io. Here, I'm sharing my screen on it now, and we'd be able to add these in. Now, right now, the process we're at is actually voting to approve this, and then letting the maintainers go at it. But we will need to figure out, what is the process by which things can be accepted, and how does that work? That's one of those things that we will need to figure out here if it is approved. The vote is actually going on right now with the Helm project maintainers to get this, and if it passes, then we'll start chasing this thing down here in short order. And the eventual goal, quite frankly, is probably to deprecate the charts repo altogether in search of these distributed locations and help folks be successful in doing that. For those of you, some of this may be new. Are there any thoughts on this?
The only one thing I want to mention is that it would do away with the need to do a lot of the workarounds that we have now with, per chart owners files and all that.
Yeah, individual organizations would be responsible for however they wanted to do it. We would probably just need some kind of proof. And eventually within Monocular, we'd probably want to have organization pages that showed everything that organization continued. We'd be able to probably stress test that with Bitnami, who's going to have a lot. and just how do we handle those kinds of things. And so a bunch of work will be going into monocular and then the public hosting of such environment. Which is something the CNCF is happy to do. We're actually talking about different ways of doing hosting options with them already, just to understand what they do, what costs they'll cover, where, how should this work, and those kinds of things, because a goal of this is we want it to be vendor neutral. So there's hub.kubeapps.com today, which is operated by Bitnami. But one of the things about the CNCF and the Helm project is we're not trying to privilege any one company in this way. We're trying to create a vendor neutral space to do stuff.
Right.
And this directory listing should kind of be that space. Everyone's kind of agreed that, we need to do that, which is why we want this bit to be part of. We're not going to discourage other directories, but once we start doing that, then we get into fragmented directories and search rather than one global search, which is ideally what we want.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. So I realized that. So this should be renamed this Google Doc, because I know that this really only takes care of one piece of that existing proposal, but it was just a quick sketch and hoping to get feedback. Yeah.
So your doc, where'd it go? I just had it open.
I can quickly summarize it for people, like summarize the steps if you want.
Please, yeah, go through.
For those who can't necessarily read it or who might just be dialing in or whatever, or who might be listening to the recording later. The idea is that some Helm repos are hosted. There are some good examples out there that are hosted on. You can do it any way you want, right? But or you can kind of set it up any way you want. But one idea would be to mimic the benefits that we have in the centralized chart repo now, but for your individual repos. So what we would do is we use Circle right now. We would set up a very simple CI through this process where you basically, log in, do an OAuth approval, and say, yes, you can, your service can write to our repo. Again, those would probably only be for people who want that, right? Some companies might say, no, we have our own way of doing this, and then they would just open the PR to add their own way of doing it to their own repo, to the monocular instance, and that would be fine too. But this would be allow individual chart maintainers to do this right now, as it is, whether or not those ever get added to the binocular repo. And the idea is that you, it would create a GitHub Pages branch that creates essentially the charts repo. Would create the artifacts, push them to the GitHub repo, their individual chart GitHub repo, and create and update that GitHub Pages page. And essentially, the GitHub page is the information that charts needs for a chart repo. That's pretty much the idea. The idea is that we would use GitHub Auth because right now all those charts are hosted on GitHub. Maybe in the future you could use other kinds of service auths. But the idea is that anyone with the correct permissions within that repo would be able to change the preferences, and that way we wouldn't really have to bother maintaining lists of people anymore. It's on each group of people that maintains a GitHub repo.
Yeah. Nope. So it would set up automation around our stuff, and this is one of the reasons that I love what Reinhard had done with breaking out our CI process into container images, so we can make them accessible to others.
That's cool.
All right. No, thanks. So that's where. Are there any questions or comments about this path, Ron? All right. Then Scott, you had a couple.
Oh, of items on the agenda. Only one was just a quick note to. There's still a step in our README that says you need to become a Kubernetes project member, and that's no longer the case. So I just made a PR to do that. Reinhard already gave just minor grammatic feedback on that. If anybody else wants to give feedback, it's this PR. It's pretty simple. I just wanted to get very quick feedback. If not right now, then asynchronously after this, and we can just update that because people are having questions. This is mostly about communication to other people.
No. You're absolutely right. We need to get this corrected, particularly around they need to become a repo collaborator of the charts repo in order to do some of this.
Yep.
Any of the charts maintainers should be able to add somebody that way.
Yeah, I got your feedback from that earlier, which was very helpful in writing this. If you happen to take a glance at it at some point and you see something off, let me know, or thumbs up it or whatever. Either way. And the only other separate thing is the question about should we? I see three kind of reasonable options for dealing with the hundreds of links to the old Kubernetes charts URL. Within various charts. This PR takes care of everything that's not in individual charts. And so it's kind of like, well, one option is don't even bother changing it because it always redirects and who cares?
No, we should change it.
Okay, so then the other two options are, should we make separate PRs so that we can bump the patch version of each chart like we have in the past? So I can automate making all of those just in one fell swoop and then we can just do it. Or should we not bother bumping the patch version and just make one PR to change it all? So
since for the individual charts, maybe we shouldn't, especially since we're going to deprecate it, because that is a significant amount of work to go through and handle those little changes across everything.
Yeah.
And since we already have redirects in place, I'm inclined to say we don't do that right now.
Yep. I was thinking the same thing, and the only thing that could possibly cause a problem for is I don't know, if someone has an open PR to a README and it's near that text, but I think that could cause a problem with a individual PR anyway. So I was inclined to say that too, because then otherwise it's that's going to be, I don't know, 60 different PRs, and then someone has to review them and then merge them. So if anyone else has any feedback, that's cool. But otherwise, so far, we can also discuss it in the PR, but it sounds like I'll just open that PR with those changes with one PR. That was what I wanted to get.
Yeah, do one PR.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks. That was all. Again, it's more minor stuff, but I thought I would ask.
No, that's good. Once you correct it, Reinhard, or if he's out for the day, I'm happy to jump in and review it then too.
Cool.
You had what was your other one you wanted to talk about? Let me pull up this. Oh,
I think that was it for me.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Are there any other questions around the charts ecosystem from anybody else who's here or wants to chat about stuff? All right, folks, fantastic meeting. We ended early. First time I've been on one of these, ended early in a while for one of these. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you next week. We have charts office hours next week, which means hopefully we can work through a bunch of the pull requests and try and get some of this cleaned up. Have a wonderful week, y'all.
You too, guys. Bye.
Bye.